So the basic issue is generation capacity adequacy and the mechanisms to assure this in general and in the case of Italy. By the way, the short expression to mention this in Italy, of course it is in English, as we usually do, capacity payments. Which is already which already incorporates a bias. So what is interesting is payments. That denotes the point of view of the issue is simplified in the eyes of the man in the street. There is someone who is paying somebody else, and you are highly interested if you are on the side of those who get the payment. So, if we take a step backwards and we look at the issue, the issue can be seen as a way to ensure that generation capacity will be sufficient in the future, which is exactly the issue that was raised in the first years of the last decade of the last century, that is 90 to 95, when the debate was very alive in Europe and certainly in my country about whether and how to liberalize, because it was something in fashion in the British Islands and perhaps elsewhere in the world, but people were not very well informed about the rest of the world, and something that was going to happen because there was a European decision about it, and the main objection to it is, if nobody is in charge, how are you sure that the service will be provided in the future? That was the basic objection. And there we are again. Although no lack of capacity has emerged in any country involved in the process of liberalization so far. But that is the issue. And in fact, the issue was not born in Europe, as we shall see. But what is it in general? In general, the instrument can be reduced to the essential of some payment that provides a revenue to generators, a revenue that they can rely upon. In principle, since it is a revenue that is different from what they get in the energy market, it is presumed to be additional to what they get in the energy market, and we shall see later on whether this is 100% true. But basically, an additional source of revenue that is reliable and that can reduce what? Reduce the risk of remaining with insufficient income. So, in a way, the payment itself reduces the risk. But the way it is organized and engineered can incorporate in a specific mechanism for risk reduction, as we shall see later on. So I added there possibly, because that depends on the type of the mechanism, it provides generators insurance against risk. What you can be sure of is that if there is an insurer policy, implicit policy, somebody will have to pay for it, and it is consumers. So, what is the origin of this? The origin is in the US, where capacity support schemes were introduced back in the 1990s. They were very basic and partial and limited mechanisms in the early years. But then there was a development, so that the US have a longer experience than Europe in this. And they have developed mechanisms that have become important in quantity, in risk hedging, which depends on the way the payment is organized, the amount of the payment, but very largely depends on the time horizon. Because, of course, that if you have a guarantee for a longer period, your risk is radically reduced. The interesting side of it is that the US have developed a way of responding to the basic objection. If you reduce the risk with a guaranteed payment, you reduce the incentive to be flexible, to be careful, to exploit the opportunities of the market, which is the basic advantage of liberalization. So you go out of monopoly, whose advantage, basic advantage, is to have a quiet life. So you put the operators in the condition to have a less quiet life, to have to face challenges in order to develop innovation and efficiency. And then you come back into a guaranteed payment, and the risk is that you go back to the quiet life. So what is interesting in the American experiment is that they engineered the mechanism so as to reduce this risk and to maintain an incentive specifically to make capacity available when the system needs it most. And in fact, in a free market system, you can create revenue enough to cover some part of the fixed costs only if you sell at the right time. That is the secret of profitability. And selling at the right time means selling when the demand is high, at peak times. And if you want to guarantee the company from not being able to take advantage of long enough peak time periods, then on one side you provide incentive to invest, but on the other side you reduce the investment to be smart. So this is the issue that has been faced, and we have something to learn from the American experience. And last but not least, the development of the American system has introduced locational differentiation. Not any plant, not anywhere, but only in the areas where the risk of insufficient capacity is concrete. So the development of the American system has been to take a small mechanism that was just some payment to ensure capacity and to develop it in a way that it could be reconciled with the policy to mitigate market power. Why? Because taking advantage of peak load prices is something that you can do very well if you have low competition. And if you take advantage from peak prices without a very strong competition disturbing you, you incur into a reaction from the antitrust authority. You are taking advantage of scarcity and you earn profits that can be considered excessive, that most people will consider excessive, and therefore you will be subject to some pressure, or the antitrust or the regulator will be themselves under pressure from the public opinion to set a ceiling on those huge profits per unit of time. Mm-hmm. But if you have that, then you are taking away that very source of revenue that makes investment profitable when you undertake it. If you cannot rely on peak time, on the high prices of peak time, off-peak times have already enough capacity in operation that you are not going to invest if it is not to take advantage of peak times. So the capacity support scheme has to be reconciled with market power mitigation provisions. And the development of this in the US has gone parallel to a system of monitoring by the regulator of the adequacy of generation capacity in the system, which is preliminary to a planning process in generation and a planning process in the networks. So in a way, and this is one basic point, this development is a countervailing process with respect to liberalization. It provides liberalization with some counterweights to ensure planning and an overall visibility of adequacy, which is system planning, and which is certainly conceptually opposite to liberalization. So that the US system is now really a mixed system. They are happy with it. The 2008 report on the reliability pricing mechanism, RPM, includes this sentence, which is clear enough. We found that the RPM has been successful in encouraging investment in new and existing capacity to maintain resource adequacy both at a regional level, an RTO-wide level, as well as on a local, smaller basis. So this is explicitly a mechanism that has become an essential wheel in the mechanism. Europe. The rationale for any such measure cannot be different. The mechanism responds to the same logical request. What is surprising is that this is happening at a time of excess capacity. Why do we have excess capacity? Well, basically for the simultaneous emergence of a fall in demand and an increase in supply. Fall in demand comes from the general macro economy. Increase in supply comes from the specific operation of development of renewable generation. And it is just a chance that the two happen together. There is no reason in the world why they should, but this is what has happened. A fall in demand and an enormous development of subsidized investment in renewables. In some countries, like my country, a third origin has played a role, and that is the end of the investment cycle unleashed by liberalization. In Italy, we had the heavy measures for liberalization at the beginning of the century, around the year 2000. The main generator, Enel, was forced to sell capacity. New operators came in, and the obvious thing to do was to scrap old generators and use the sites and build new, very efficient combined cycle CCGT generators. This is specific to Italy because in Italy we have no nuclear, and we decided to go on having no nuclear. We have little coal, and there are very little chances to increase coal because there is an environmental resistance to any new use of coal. And so gas is all. Gas is the main thermal source. And if you have gas, you build CCGT plants. You do not go on with old gas turbines, of course. And if you have heavy oil, you just discard it, and you substitute it with the CCGT. And that was the decision of many operators in the first decade of the century. So that at the end of the first decade, we have a fantastic set of new generators, very efficient, and they were fully adequate to the existing demand. The problem was that the demand started to fall and the renewables started to come in. And that added to the present imbalance of our capacity. But let's go back to the general question. You should tell me what. What?
50 minutes.
Okay. Okay. When I see signs of insufferance, I understand.
If you finish, for example,
Right.
3:20, 3:50.
Okay. Let's go back to the basic question. Why is Europe bothering with a mechanism to provide adequate capacity right at the time when there is excessive capacity? I guess that there is a double reason, a very a very logical reason that is to put in a mechanism today that can be useful tomorrow. Not wait for the time of when capacity will be insufficient. Take advantage of the time when it is not needed, and you put the house in order. Introduce the mechanism, test it, try it, so it is there for the time when it will be useful. And then there is another reason that makes you uneasy when you talk about it. There are companies who are in trouble because this insufficient demand makes it difficult to to resist in an adverse situation, and so some capacity payment can be a way not only to provide capacity in the future, but to allow companies to survive the recession, which is a way to assure capacity in the future, but not necessarily the only one. But this explains the pressure. Let's go back to a little bit of analysis. Why should the system be necessary? We do not have anything similar in other sectors of the economy. So what makes electricity so special? Basically two reasons. One is the missing money problem, so-called. That is, if the economics of your plant depends on the income that you made in the peak demand periods, which are rather short, and you have to make a lot of money in those short periods, then you are in a fragile condition. Because first, as I said before, somebody will come up someday and say that your profits at those times are excessive and slap a cap on top of your revenues. The only idea that this may happen creates uncertainty and reduces the propensity to invest. Second, the detection of the scarcity situation may be difficult. The ability of a company to detect the situation and have the plants ready and be ready to enter the market at the right time is more easily said than done. So you have, when you're deciding an investment, you have some uncertainty on whether you will be able to exploit the narrow windows in which you can make profits high enough to depreciate your investment. And the arbitrage in sequential markets, the various sessions of the electricity exchanges is imperfect. So that what works on paper may not work in reality. This is one reason. The other reason is a system problem. That is, how can we be sure that rational decisions taken by individual operators add up to a rational decision for the whole? If we see a future in which a new plant, very efficient, can be profitable, making all the calculation about the load curves in the next years and all that, it is enough that two or three of us take the same decision without knowing of one another, and we end up with a disaster. Technically speaking, supply and demand curves are steep enough that if you displace them wrongly, you can have huge profits or huge losses. The situation is typical of electricity markets, a situation where the lack of coordination of the operators may produce serious imbalances. And of course, this applies to unforeseen changes in demand as well, so that this is typical of electricity, of the non-storable product, that uncertainty uncertainty is higher, and therefore this is another reason for saying that a mechanism to reduce the uncertainty has some rationale in it. So these mechanisms have been introduced by many countries all over Europe. They have one bunch of characters in common: grant payment for capacity availability. The payment is independent on whether you use or you don't use the capacity, and the payment has to be granted for a relatively long time. But then after this, differences open up. How does a support system work? It increases the generator's income, it reduces the risk, it hedges in part the income, and it helps coordination because the fact that the payment is possible involves some publicity. If you have to be sure to be awarded a payment in the future, you have to know it before you invest. So you have to make it public that you are going to invest. There has to be an application somewhere, and you have to have an answer before you invest. But that is in itself a correction of the lack of coordination problem, because your competitors will know that you are going to invest, and you will know whether your competitors are going to invest. And if you see that one investment can be profitable, but 3 investments are not going to be profitable, and you are one of the 3, you take your consequences, and you might go back on your decision. Is this costly to the consumers? Well, this is a good ground for a doctoral thesis here, because whether you imagine perfect or less than perfect competition and information, there are various possible outcomes. I should say, in principle, there should be a cost to the consumers, because it is difficult to imagine that the revenue from the electricity market goes down by the same amount of the revenue that goes up from the capacity market. Quite unlikely. But I shall not go into this. It's sufficient for me to say that probably consumers are going to pay. It is not a free meal there. Someone has an advantage and somebody else has to pay for the advantage. But in principle, there might be a win-win solution, and that is approximately can be seen in the case in which coordination issues are very important. Because then if you really have the risk of suboptimality from lack of coordination, then you do not need to have large payments. You do not need to have large burden on consumers. The information side of the mechanism would be enough to provide a large benefit to the system. And so it might be that you end up with a Pareto optimal situation. But these are sharp, heavy assumptions. Yes, heavy assumptions. Okay. Just a look at the Italian system, which is interesting enough, I believe, outside Italy, because it is changing. So there is a change underway that might be interesting to know. The situation of overcapacity, I told you, and you see it, but you really don't see it because The worst is in 2012 and 2013, while the numbers available end up in 2011. But you see the diminishing number of hours worked by plants. These are the columns. In the system, the diminishing amount of sales by the thermal generators and the sharply increasing amount of sales by the renewable generators. And I can tell you that once we have the 2012 data, which we have in fact, not official, so I didn't have the time to put them into the picture, you would have a much lower column, much shorter hours, much lower level for the red line, lower sales from thermal plants, and much higher steep rise of the blue line, that is increased supply from renewables. And you see the origin of it is that the peak demand and consumption in the last decade have increased very little, 12-14% in 10 years, in 11 years, while capacity has increased 40-50% in the same period. And again, once we put 2012 into there, this discrepancy increases. So the existing system is, well, in a way similar to the original American system, that is small and simple, so that there is a fixed amount of money, and this is given out at the end of the year to the generators according to the availability of their plants in the various critical hours. This has been criticized for being weak, and criticized on the basis of the idea that if we make it stronger, we will reduce the incentive to make capacity available at the right time, because there will be a guaranteed independent on whether the capacity is used or not. And the time horizon too short to really produce an incentive. So a new system has been designed. It is not yet in place, but it has been decided, and it will go into operation by the end of this year. And this is rather similar to the American system today. That is, the amount of payment is not set, but it is the result of an auction. So the conditions: we pay you if you make capacity available. The conditions are set, and then the generators put forward their bids to the system operator. It is called an option. The term is has to be taken cautiously, because it is an option in which you do not opt. There is no choice. You can apply or not apply, but then there is no option. It is an automatic option. The generator receives the payment, fixed premium F, commits to pay the system operator every hour the rent as defined by the difference between the spot price and a predetermined strike price. That is, the generator receives a fixed payment but pays back the rent that can be earned in the peak hours. In this way, the generator is incentivized to make the capacity available in the peak hours, because otherwise he will not get the payment, but he will still have to pay back the rent that he missed. So the rent element works in reverse, and this maintains the incentive without the generator appropriating the rent, so that the system becomes less costly, because it can be a substantial payment. It is financed in part by the rent itself. Then the details are, of course, how the P strike is calculated, and it is calculated by the variable cost of the marginal unit, which is an open cycle gas turbine, which is less efficient than the combined cycle. Reliability is guaranteed for a number of years, so the system should provide a strong enough and stable incentive. So the scarcity rent that the generators expect to be able to collect in an ordinary free system provides an effect, because the generators cannot appropriate it, but they are induced to provide the capacity for fear of having to lose if they don't. This should reconcile the two objectives of reducing the risk and maintaining the incentives. The present debate in Italy is made difficult because the mechanism is not so easy, so that the discussion is circumscribed by the people who understand it. It looks rational. I have not seen but one theoretical criticism. And the one theoretical criticism is that the mechanism is okay if you really let the payment F be decided by the auction. In fact, the system as planned has a floor to that price. So that the idea of the payment going down to zero has been refused. And if this is a payment mechanism, there has to be a payment. So for practical reasons, but of course there is some lobbying behind this, the payment has a positive floor. And theoretically, this is unwarranted. Beyond that, I cannot tell you. The experience will show. The conclusion I can draw is that the effort to get the best from the world experience and design something similar to what has been experienced in the US might might mark the way towards some sort of European convergence. I think it would be useful for the working of the European electricity market and the behavior of the companies if we had one system, or not two different national systems. And the way is, I don't pretend that the system planned in Italy be the best, but the issues are those. Any system should face this issue. And we have to recognize that by following this trend, we confirm what is already fairly apparent from the huge effort in the support of renewables. Less than 10 years after liberalization has been the mantra in Europe, we are substantially reducing the amount of market freedom and the amount of free setting of prices, and going towards a system that is not socialism, is more or less what is working in the US. And something that seems to me Britain is clearly, openly heading to. That is a system that is necessarily more inclusive of planning as a consequence of this environmental side that was not so clear 15 years ago or 20 years ago when the liberalization process was started. We are not going back to where we started from. We are heading toward a new equilibrium. And of course, again, the big challenge is that this new equilibrium, since it has to be complicated and very delicate and very fragile in the balance between market and regulation, it should really be rather consistent around Europe. Because if we add one further variety of models, we greatly increase the uncertainty of the operators and the possibility of drawing a benefit from intra-European trade. Thank you.